Yeah, so I've just set up a bird feeder recently outside my window, and I can see woodpecker on telegraph pole. It's up top at the moment, and I'm hoping it comes across the bird feeder, which would be great. I'm just doing a bit of study. I'm looking up computer at the minute. It says Aristotle.
As he sat and listened to his teacher, he was a portrait of elegance and concentration. He had a handsome face and graceful mannerisms. His eyes were small but sharp and acute. The cloak and sandals he wore were always of the best quality, and he wore ornate rings on his fingers, for he was a man from a prestigious family, and he himself was wealthy. But the external finery was like rags compared to the refinement and wealth that dwelled within his mind.
And on the telegraph pole,
as he is now,
100 feet away, is a woodpecker. I'm hoping it comes across. That'll make it approximately
Plato's reading of the Phaedo,
10 or 15 feet from me. I've seen it there earlier today. It's a recent bird feeder I've just unlocked, so I'm hoping it comes across to join us. That'd be nice.
And he spent his last day with his followers, talking about the immortality of the human soul. Parts of the Phaedo were moving and inspirational, but it was a lengthy book, and there were many pages of long, tedious dialogue. As Plato read, his audience began to dwindle, first one, then another. In the end, when the teacher looked up, only one student remained, still engrossed by the emotion of the event, still absorbed by the issues of death, immortality, and courage. It was Aristotle. Like Plato and Socrates, Aristotle himself became one of the greatest philosophers of ancient Greece. He was also a teacher, scientist, and writer, tutor to Alexander the Great, and founder of the famous Lyceum, the Athenian school considered to be the world's first true university. Together, Plato and Aristotle are considered the two greatest philosophers of antiquity, and in the view of many, Aristotle is considered the greatest of all time. Aristotle viewed the natural world through the eyes of a biologist and applied biological principles to all spheres of human knowledge. His philosophy had great influence on succeeding generations of thinkers, including Dante and Thomas Aquinas, to name only a few. Dante called Aristotle the master of those who know. Just to list the achievements and contributions of this remarkable man would fill a book in itself. Some of the contributions for which he's best known include: he was the first to classify the various disciplines of human knowledge,
I've got some budley
such as biology, physics, politics, and art. He developed the science of argument through logic.
I'm trying to buy a bit of land legally to make a nature reserve and open it free for people with disabilities to visit.
It is still today what Aristotle made it. He was also the first to separate the study of weather from astronomy. He was the first to classify animals into genus and species. He identified new uses of language and created new terms to apply to them,
Cartesian Newtonian desire to quantify and classify all things in nature.
Facts. He founded the science of psychology and was the first to consider the problems of the human psyche as a separate discipline. And he was the first to separate the study of ethics or virtue from the study of knowledge. Aristotle was a prolific author, and records of the time indicate he may have written as many as 400 works on education, science, rhetoric, literary criticism, political theory, poetry, philosophy, and thoughts at large. Many of these works are believed to be lectures and notes he wrote for his students at the Lyceum. Of these hundreds of valuable works, only about 50 have survived. Of those that have, the most famous are Metaphysics, First Philosophy, Rhetoric, Poetics, De Anima, and his most popular and influential work, the Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle lived in a time when many important forces converged to help form one of the foremost philosophical minds in history. Most importantly, he was a product of Greek culture. Before the Greeks, mankind was concerned mostly with death, but to the Greeks, life was the most significant fact, and human life was the greatest wonder on earth. Their sports and their art give testament to the great pleasure in and enthusiasm for living. The Greeks were also the first philosophers. To them, the great miracle of man was his logos, his ability to think, reason, and know. Through understanding the nature of the universe and humankind, the Greeks believed they had the key to understanding the individual's place and purpose in life. Fueled by this faith in man's logos, a long line of esteemed thinkers and philosophers paraded through ancient Greek history, each contributing a new perspective to those who went before. and each founding a school of thought that influenced the next generation. They included Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans, who approached all things with the purpose of finding the relation between the whole and its parts, and who saw the number as the most important principle. Parmenides, with his view that ideas were reality. The Sophists, with their survival of the fittest philosophy. Socrates, who maintained the meaning of things was more real than the things themselves, that there were eternal truths, that man could reach perfection and immortality. He developed a method of question and answer now called the Socratic method, and he was the only man ever executed in Athens.
So I think wild birds as habitat is diminishing.
Socrates' student, who felt the world was an illusionary shadow,
peanuts in
and we could come
feeders,
to
I've
know
got
the truth
some
by giving
wild
up the
bird seed
pleasures of the
mix.
senses. And finally, Aristotle, who took something from
If
all
we
that
all
went
encourage
before him,
wildlife world to
and
be
then
a
added his own ideas.
richer place.
One of the most impressive and unique networks in human knowledge was the learning that was passed down through the four great men of the 5th and 4th centuries BC. Socrates was a teacher to Plato. Plato was a teacher to Aristotle. And Aristotle was a teacher to Alexander the Great. All of them changed history. Aristotle was born in 384 BC in the Macedonian town of Stagira, a Greek colony in the Thracian Sea, in what is now called Thessalonica. At the time of his birth, the Greek city-state was
You've
already
looked,
in
it's
decline.
listening, it's trying to learn
Athens had been
something.
conquered by Sparta 20 years before.
Epistemology, a
And Greece was
branch
torn
of
by a
theology
power
that
struggle
deals with
between
knowledge.
Sparta and the city-state of Thebes. While the Greek city-states were growing weaker, a new power was rising in the north, the Kingdom of Macedonia, which would soon give birth to Alexander the Great, who would establish a huge empire stretching from Greece to the Indian Ocean. Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, was a prominent doctor who served as court physician to the king of Macedonia. His family was of noble origin, with a tradition in medicine. Aristotle probably had early medical training, and undoubtedly spent his first years at the Macedonian capital of Pella, where the king lived. Both of Aristotle's parents died young, and he was put under the guardianship of a Macedonian official until he was 17, and left for Plato's academy outside of Athens. There he came under one of the greatest influences of his life. He remained at the academy 20 years, until Plato's death in 347 BC. During those years, under the guidance of the outstanding educator of his age, Aristotle polished his scientific talents with a refined awareness of ethics, aesthetics, and philosophy. Plato called him the mind of the school, and nicknamed him the reader because of his vast knowledge, which he gained from constant reading. Almost immediately, Plato made Aristotle a teacher of rhetoric. Plato's academy was the center of learning for the entire Mediterranean world. Men from all over came to discuss the critical questions of the day. Many of them were the famous thinkers of their time. In addition, Plato traveled widely and brought back new information, ideas, and perspectives to his students. The atmosphere at the school was cosmopolitan, invigorating, and liberal. Abstract problems were discussed in the Socratic manner, and Aristotle had the opportunity to learn the difference between knowledge gained through discussions and analysis, and that gained through observation and deduction. He also had a chance to learn thoroughly all the theories of earlier philosophers. He would later refer to these as the opinions of the wise. The discussion method at the academy also helped Aristotle and other students realize the importance of definition, language, and orderly thinking. Arguments had to be made in a logical, systematic way. During these years, Aristotle was deeply under the influence of his teacher, yet few of his writings from this time have survived. Because he later took issue with some of Plato's viewpoints, there have always been rumors that the two had personal conflicts, but the truth is to the contrary. Aristotle held Plato in high esteem, even during the latter portion of his life, when he turned away from
So Aristotle's
Platonic
an
theory
interesting
and founded
guy, I
his own
think.
Aristotelian school of thought.
Aristotelian logic. All good stuff. Inspires you to learn more. Every day's a learning day, they say.